All right. Member Frank Parks?
Here.
Member Steve Cooley?
Here.
Member Bill Bengesa?
Here.
Vice Chair Richard Beneke?
Here.
Chair Baron Janetti?
Here.
Councilmember Martinez?
Here.
And Councilmember Carroll.
Here.
No, I take it there's no actions for excused absence because we're all here. Pledge of Allegiance, would Mr. Cooley lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Ready to begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I knew I could count on you. Catching you by surprise, I wasn't sure about Richard if he was. Approval or adjustments to the agenda? Yes.
We have an adjustment on the agenda as a subcommittee update. And unfortunately, the report that was submitted is not complete, so we need to postpone that to the next meeting.
Is that item 3, the audit?
Item
Item three.
Item 3 we'll pull from the agenda and put it on next month's agenda. Okay. Anything else? Okay, public comment. There is no public comment because there's nobody here.
Correct.
Action items, approval of the minutes from our last meeting.
I had a question on the minutes.
Okay.
Under you have 3, 4, and then you go to topics for future agenda items. And there was actually an action taken there, which wasn't really on the agenda. So, and that was to move our meeting from the first Monday to the second Monday. Now, I would suggest that we could probably correct that just by saying topics for future agendas / actions taken, and then leave it at that. But it sounds like we took some, this was supposed to be for future agenda items, but we took some actions. You know what I'm saying?
So there were topics that were discussed and motions were taken on it. However, it was not on the agenda. But I took it as a consensus that everybody agreed that we were going to, move the meeting and to have a special meeting. So I put it on under that, but I can move it under something else. I'm just not sure how to record that.
I know it wasn't an agenda item, but I mean, to discuss a future meeting and the date change, I don't see why that should be.
Well,
Seems pretty harmless. It doesn't seem like we made anything other than changing our meeting date.
Right.
well, can I make a suggestion?
Sure.
Why don't we just put it on the next agenda to discuss permanently changing the meeting and put it as an action item, and we'll discuss and formalize it. We'll just
Okay.
consider this ad hoc change that we probably did because of staff's request. So let's make it official by putting it on the next agenda. What do you think, Mr. Beneke? Think that'll do it?
You could do that. Actually, what Nicole was saying also makes sense in terms of the consensus. I guess the problem I had was that the vote, the idea of voting on something that wasn't on
Yes.
it. But if there's a general consensus, that's not really a vote.
Okay.
In my mind, so.
That's fine, yeah.
If you want to reword that as a correction, that there was a general consensus to move the meetings. And then if you think it needs a formal agenda item and a vote, then we can go ahead and do that too, but personally, I don't think it probably does. I don't know how many people read the minutes, but I've always been taught that minutes are a record.
They're a permanent
Record. They go down in a permanent record. Somebody 5 years from now can dig this up and look at it and make something out of it if they want to. So I know it's kind of ticky-tacky sometimes, but I like to make sure we're all on the same page when it comes to stuff like this, so.
So would you like me to remove the word vote and just replace it with consensus? Is that what you're?
Yeah, the unanimous consensus to move meetings from blah, 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 blah. And if you think we need to formalize that, we could put it on the agenda for next week. If not, it's
I'm
And we'll
fine with
just,
consensus because, again, it has nothing to do with other than us as a committee when
Right.
the appropriate time is for us to meet. To have a debate and public comment about us having a meeting on a Monday. We're going to have it on the second Monday anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
and then when you can just include the minutes in the next meeting, we can approve them then?
Okay, or you can approve them now with.
With that
With that
change?
Change, yeah.
All
Okay.
right.
I'll approve the minutes of our last meeting with the amendment to the minutes to say consensus, unanimous consensus to move them instead of vote.
Okay. Is that the only item on the minutes?
I'll second it.
Okay, we have a second, but is there further discussion? Okay, we'll vote.
Typically,
First and second.
we've done ayes and noes.
Okay.
If you want to do the same, or we can do a roll call, whichever
Okay.
you prefer.
Everybody in favor, aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, carries. Review the financials. I take it, Mr. Financial Director?
Sure.
You have the
Thank
floor.
you. So before you, again, similar to what we did the last couple of times, I've got reasonable responses that at least the format seems to be working. I will be happy to adjust if I hear otherwise. But what you have in front of you are the general fund, the status of the general fund budget to actual through January. So it's 7 months out of the fiscal year. And the same thing for the wastewater operating fund. And what you have is a comparative similar to it's the same thing that we've been showing the last couple months. And that is you have 17 through January, same time frame, and then you have 18, 19 through the same time. So it's comparative, it's providing you, for most line items, it's a pretty good comparative document. There's a few areas where we've made some changes in our operating structure where it's not as comparative, and I'll explain those as we go through it. So I'll take you through the general fund first. We'll start off at the top with taxes, and as you can see, if you look at the bottom of the tax category for fiscal year 1920, we're much higher than we were in prior years, but that's in large part due to a $5 million one-time that we received. But even if you back that out, we're still ahead. You can look at real property taxes, we're trending ahead. Franchise fees is the one that's got the $5 million, but even without that, what we have is not only do we have the one-time $5 million, but we also get about $525,000 every quarter also out of that franchise fee, but that's on an ongoing basis. Bottom line is taxes are really hard because they're not linear. We collect taxes in kind of intermittent times in the year. So when you start comparing those to the budget, it makes it a little bit more difficult because for example, the line item that I have there where I talk about motor vehicle in lieu, which is the bottom of your tax category, we don't collect that until June essentially. It comes in as a lump sum and it'll be in the neighborhood of $5 million. And so it appears that you're well behind, but in fact, it's just more of a timing thing. We're actually trending pretty well on taxes. We're ahead from last year. As I move down below and look at the permits, that's an area where actually we are trending low, and I think we're going to end the fiscal year low. And it's something that I'm looking at adjusting the budget in the near future. We're going to be working on the next year's budget here shortly, and we'll be looking at those numbers pretty carefully. But we're trending low on buildings permits, and we're trending even lower on inspections. I expect we're going to make up some ground on those in this final 4 or 5 months of the year, but I don't think we're going to get near the budget target. As I go forward and look at, there's a note on outsourcing of solid waste. I think we've talked about that a couple times. I just leave the note in here just for now. It'll go away next year. You won't have to have that, probably won't have to keep talking about that, but we outsourced, so both the revenues that we get, and then you'll see on the expense side, are not showing there. Instead, we have that franchise fee that you see up above in your taxes. Bottom line for the charges for the revenues is we're trending above last fiscal year. Some of that, again, a big chunk of that is because of the one-time fee, the franchise fee. But we are trending a little bit lower on a comparative year-to-year basis because our permits and our inspection fees are quite a bit lower than we have seen in prior years, the last 2 years at least. As I move forward and look at salaries and wages, you can see at 7/12 of the year, we're tracking pretty much on target for those areas. Where if I look at my operating expenditures, I'm going all the way down to the kind of that orange near the bottom. We're also tracking pretty close and slightly below budget. So operating expenditures are also not entirely linear. You will see usually a bump up as we get near the end of the fiscal year in expenditures. The bottom line, if you go down to the very bottom in blue, we're trending quite nicely compared to prior years, as you can see, just above that in the green line. I expect that we're going to have a surplus, meaning revenues exceed expenditures, by the end of the year of somewhere in the neighborhood of $6 to $8 million. And that will further add to the unassigned general fund balance, which is very helpful for the city council. Gives some decision-making at least. I'd be happy to stop and answer any questions on the general fund before we move forward.
Go ahead, Steve.
I have one question on building permits. Do we not know basically how many new buildings have been approved? And I would expect those would come in on a regular basis. Or is there enough that we're just relying on somebody making changes, businesses, homeowners, whatever? Was this a bad budget number, or have they slowed down appreciably?
That's a combination of a few things. Not having been here, in prior years, I can't speak to the budgeting that took place for this, but I do believe that the budget was overstated. I think that's going to be clear by the end of the fiscal year. And the assumptions that should go into this, I'm not sure what assumptions did go into this, would be looking at both your residential and commercial development and getting a feel for the timing on when those are going to come in. The challenge with commercial development is that it's a little less predictable. We have had some pretty strong commercial developments, and when they come through and when the permits are pulled is when we record the revenues. So prior year, you could see some big numbers, but we had Amazon come through and some very large commercial developments. So that can be a little bit of a timing factor depending on, and it's not always the crystal ball that you have. I think it should be a little more dialed in than it is, in my personal opinion, but not having been here, I can't speak to what it went into the budget building. I think we're going to try and be a little bit more precise next year.
Thank you.
You bet.
Yeah, Frank.
I have two questions, are probably the same. The cost recovery, where we had nothing budgeted, but we got 400,000 nearly.
Where are you looking, just to help me out?
Category 50, category 53.
Yes. So cost recovery comes into a couple of categories. We can bring in some cost recoveries that might come in from legal actions where we get some cost recoveries in, but also from workers' comp claims that we bring in.
Okay, so they're not budgetable.
I don't know, speaking to the budget, why those were not budgeted. It's possible, Frank, that they were budgeted elsewhere and that they're being recorded here, and that's something I'll look into. It's a note I'll take.
The other thing is category 90, the transfers, significantly below on a percent basis for 7 months, but I don't know how you determine when to make transfers.
Yeah, I can speak to that pretty directly. So we're absolutely something I'm really working on improving. We're starting to get better at it. So the fact you can see that we had really no transfers in the last 2 years. In fact, we're showing a negative. And I'm starting to try and move towards getting quarterly transfers. There's two major pieces to the money that gets transferred into the general fund. The first is gas tax. So the monies come into its own fund and gas tax, and then what we do is we transfer those into the general fund, and we're now making quarterly transfers into the general fund. And then the other part is CFDs, it's community facilities districts, and the operating portion of those fees come in. We have been historically bringing those in almost all at the end of the year. And so you'll see a big bump up of probably around $5 million that comes in near the end of the year, a little less than 5 million, but pretty close. And so that's why it's so low now. I do intend in the future to bring those in quarterly like we're doing with the gas tax now. So I think that that'll be more representative going forward on a quarter-by-quarter basis.
Yeah, Richard.
So on the overall assessment, it sounds great when you look at the trending of the general fund surplus, possibly $6 to $8 million. However, you say it's due in large part to the one-time solid waste franchise fee. So if you take that $5 million out, you're really looking at about maybe $1 to $2 million surplus.
Yeah, I'd say it's closer to 2 to 3, but yes, exactly. I think that's, your statement is accurate. I think we're pretty a little bit off from where we were last year from an operating standpoint. And that's due in large part to 2 factors. One, our expenses are up, and 2, our permitting and inspection fees are down.
I know when you put budgets together, it's a kind of a juggling act. In a
Yeah.
way. You go back and you look at what has transpired in the past. Obviously, that makes some sense. But nobody has a crystal ball to predict what the future holds. And you have to make a lot of assumptions. But I think what makes a budget a good budget is one that remains flexible, needs to be looked at and adjusted accordingly as things are determined, so that you don't go down the road and all of a sudden you get this big surprise at the end of the road. We missed that by $2 million or whatever. And so I think part of our job is to try to question some of these things, and I think one of the biggest things, and always had a problem with this with cities, not just this city, but cities in general, is their revenue. The bulk of their revenue comes kind of piecemeal. It's not like you can say, I want $5 million a month, and that's it. And then and it comes in $5 million a month, and then you can pay everything off, and it doesn't work that way. But so any creativity or some kind of way to be creative and trying to make that more streamlined would be to our advantage, I think, in the long run, when you look at trying to level out a budget and not have very many surprises at the end of the year.
Frank and I talked a little while back about this, and he's interested in showing things on almost an accrual basis. I can do that. I just would want to caveat that any document that I would do that would show estimations would be just estimations. But I'd be happy to look at a document where I can smooth out the revenues a little bit. It's just, until I know what's coming in, it's going to be a guess. It's going to be a guess. It's going to be more of a forecast than it will be any actuals. So I'd be happy to demonstrate those types of numbers, but I'll need to put a caveat in that they're estimates.
Right, what you might suggest that you do is to have a second, like you got item number, say, 420, you could have a 421 that is the accrual adjustment, annualized accrual, or something like that, so that we obviously know that that's going to reverse out by the end of the fiscal year.
Yeah, we can do our best estimate on what numbers are going to come in. The property tax and sales tax are always a little bit difficult, but we can do our best estimate and try and do it on a smoothed out basis. That'll give you a little bit better picture rather than just the notes and explanation. I'll try that for next month, and we'll see how it plays out.
I like the notes and explanation. I really appreciate that. That helps.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah, that's what.
So then I'm sorry.
Hold on.
Okay, item 54. Investment income earnings for 2017-18, there was no earnings at all?
I don't know for those years. I'll be honest with you, I have to look at it. My guess is that there were some earnings, but they were posted somewhere else. That's my best guess. I will check into that, and I'll let you know. Next time, I'll have a note for you on that.
I have a comment, not a question. The motor vehicle license fees in lieu of that we get given to us. Well, sent to us, not given to us. Let me rephrase that. Nothing's given to us, but the, it doesn't relate to these years that we're looking at, but there was when the state was in crisis mode with its budget, they withheld cities' dollars that were motor vehicle in lieu of fees. And there was a lawsuit against the state to get those fees back. I think it was Fontana, maybe Corona, but there were a couple of them that had big amounts that the state had to give back to them. And then the state produced a list of all the cities that were owed money, and they were all different amounts. And Beaumont was on the list for money. It wasn't much. I really am trying to remember what the amount was. I think it was about 13,000. I could be off, but it wasn't. We weren't one of the big ones, but it's still our money. And I mentioned it to the former finance director a couple of times, and I never did get a clear answer on whether it was followed through on. I don't know if there's any way you can check on that, but it would be nice to know that if that money was on the table, and the money was definitely on the table. It was a state list, and I'm sure I can find it in my document somewhere where the list is, but you'll probably be able to get a hold of it also.
Yeah, no, I'll definitely look into it.
Okay.
I wasn't even aware of
Yeah,
this,
I
so-
did. I brought it up a couple of times, but I did not ever hear whether we went and picked up that money or
I'll look
not.
into it.
And that would be,
Was the onus on us to ask?
yes,
ask
oh
for it?
yes, they weren't
Wasn't-
gonna push
wasn't
it
on
at
the
you.
same- Okay.
No, they were not gonna push it at you. You got the list, and if you took some action on the list, then fine, you got the money. Otherwise, you didn't get anything, so,
Jeff,
thank you.
That'd be a good one to follow up on.
Yeah,
So
you bet.
since you opened up with discussing the motor vehicle fees,
Yeah,
it just,
you bet.
otherwise, I'm going to forget to bring it up to you, so, thank you.
Hopefully there wasn't a time limit on it.
No, I don't think there, I didn't get,
I remember that lawsuit.
yeah, when I
yeah.
got involved and heard about the report and pulled the report and everything, I don't remember there being a time limit on it, but thanks, Jeff.
Oh, yeah, you bet. So then the other piece of this is the wastewater operating fund, and I'll take a few minutes to go through this. As you're aware, this is a proprietary fund or an enterprise fund, and it operates independently of the general fund. This fund is fairly new from the standpoint of how we're operating it now. We've been doing it for a while, but we were contracting it out, and as the council members know real well, and some of the finance committee members might, when we took it over, we found a lot of things that needed to be repaired and fixed and corrected, and we're still going through that process. So this is probably, if you say which of the funds and budgets they get me most concerned or interested, this is one of them, partly because we don't know as much, and we don't really know what we don't know. So they're learning a lot from this, and we'll be going to council next week, actually, with some budget adjustments with regard to the wastewater fund. So your revenues, if you will, I'm going to go right down to your proprietary revenues, which is 56 on here, midway down through the first page, are tracking very close. You have 3 of 6 payments in now. Last time, as you recall, we were only 2. And we're at 49% of the budget, so it's a little bit under your midpoint. And our investment earnings are up. I'm going to be actually taking a budget adjustment up there. We anticipate that's going to end up closer to 60,000 or so at the end of the year. We also are tracking a little bit low on your wages. You're at about 46.5%. At this point in time of the year, you should be closer to between 55 and 60, so we're tracking a little low on the wages. Operating expenses is where I expect us to run into some challenges. We're currently tracking at a little over 50%, but I expect if you look down below under capital improvements, it's got the contingency line. We have an emergency repair that we've been working on, and we expect it to absorb pretty much all of that $300,000, or the vast majority of it. So I've colored that in pink. It has not been expended. This is kind of down the lines of the council. I'm showing you something that is in the process of going on. And so I expect that fully to be spent out. Your debt service comes in two pieces. We talked about this last month. The first piece is both principal and interest, and then the second payment, which will be coming in September, is only for interest. And so while we're more than halfway through, with our payments, we should be very close to almost precisely at the 4.7 million. Bottom line is we were budgeted to have a surplus of about $12,000, revenues exceeding expenditures. Right now, we're tracking to have a deficit. It's not quite a deficit of 815 that you're seeing here. I think that's going to get a bit better partly because your transfers are, weighted a little more heavily in the first year. And I think that I've also shown you a contingency being fully spent out, so that's 100% spent out on that particular line item. Having said that, I do expect this budget is going to come over budget and probably somewhere in the neighborhood of $200,000 to $400,000 at the year end. So we are preparing some adjustments for the council to consider next week on that, and it's a budget that I think is going to bear careful watching. This year, we have enough reserves in hand to absorb that, and we will for the next year or two, but to right the ship is going to require probably looking at both the revenue and the expense side going forward. So happy to answer questions on this one.
The bond that was issued was to build a new sewer plant, right?
Yeah, two pieces. One is the plant itself, and then the brine line, which is the lines that take the sewage to the ultimate where it goes.
So they're building, what are they building? Well, the bond is building what?
The bond funds.
Everybody went through this when they
Yeah, the
explained
bond funds are building the sewer plant and the brine line
And the brine
extensions,
line,
yes.
okay. Now, so that increased everybody's sewer fees to issue that bond. There was an offset between what we were paying and what the bond cost, basically. So now we're paying for the bond and continuing operational costs on our sewer bill, right?
Yeah, I think there was a study that was done, I think it was about a year and a half ago, that they did a rate study, and they developed a rate study based on those principles of, having to pay down the debt.
So my understanding now is that after all those studies, that they run into some problems with, I don't understand the overrides. Is it overrides part of the construction of the new facility, or are the overrides a result of old facilities that have to be maintained till the new facilities come online? Or what exactly are we talking about here on these unforeseen costs? Because if they're part of the contract issued to build a new plant, and we need to look at our contract. Anyway, I'm just trying to understand, get a clear picture of where all these additional costs are coming in.
Yeah, to speak to the actual project itself, I'd have to defer to our assistant city manager. She's a relative expert on that and can speak to that. With regard to the emergency repairs, I did speak with her, and that is actually nothing to do with the work that the contractor's doing on for the bond, with the bond money. In fact, it's as we've had a lot of rain, and we've had some essentially lines that have been unsupported and in danger of breaking because they're essentially bearing a lot of weight, and so we've had to shore up those lines and get them supported structurally. But that's more of a repair. We are going to capitalize those costs because of the nature of it. It will extend the life of those assets, but that's nothing to do with the bond issuances. So those particular expenses were unforeseen. We do have a contingency built in, and it's again going to absorb all the contingency. But one of my comments, and for really good details, we'll need to get to Assistant City Manager to address your concerns. But as we're going through, we're finding a lot of things that we didn't know about operationally that need to be addressed. Some of those will be addressed with bond proceeds and through that construction process, but some of them are operational in nature. And so there's a little bit of both.
I think those are good questions. I think maybe when we get to future agenda items, that we could ask for a report on the wastewater treatment plant, the difference between when we've had to use contingency money because of emergency circumstances, what goes to repairing the existing facility versus what goes to the new contracts to build new facilities, and where the division is. I think it's a good idea to get those answered all at once,
I agree.
where we can do secondary questions. So maybe we should consider that when we get to future agenda items and make sure that everybody's comfortable with it. And that would also be a time to even discuss the sewer fees and where the amount came from.
I think that's fair because she's the expert. Christine would be the one to talk and answer those questions.
But Jeff is correct in that we are having to maintain an old facility to keep everybody's toilet flushing while we're expanding and building the new facilities. So it does need to be clear in everyone's mind, what has happened and what are the costs and fees that have gone to that, and are we out of range on what we set aside for the new construction?
And when the new construction's up, does that balance it out? Do we equalize those old expenses? Are there some efficiencies
Yeah, I
that
just,
we gain?
I want to get ahead of the curve here, because you can see where I'm going with this.
Oh,
If
absolutely.
people get out there and say, well,
What-
they told us this, and now we're doing that, and now we're
Sure.
going to be paying more, and so I'm just trying to be transparent here and getting all this stuff out in the open, because I think there's a lot of truth. It's a very old system. There are things probably unforeseen that are going to cost some money. You got to deal with that. You're moving ahead with the construction. Is it online, on time? And a lot of these questions need to be
Okay,
kind
let's-
of discussed and talked about.
When we get to the agenda items, let's get that on. Frank?
I wanted to talk about this deficit of 800,000 or so. As I see it, the expenses are on track. They're 58% or 57.7, which is 7/12 roughly. The revenues are at 49%, which is 50%, obviously, and represent only 6 months, because you get 3 payments. But if you were to consider there's a 7th month that we've earned, just haven't posted yet, haven't received, that deficit is nowhere near 800,000. On paper it is.
That's correct.
But in reality, it isn't.
Yeah, and that's correct.
Where the numbers fall?
Just don't want-
That's why I told you, I thought the ultimate deficit's gonna be between 200,000 and 400,000.
Julio?
Yeah, 2 questions. So the revenue trending slightly below budget, is that partially due to the forecast of building that didn't materialize? And therefore, we didn't get that revenue that we thought we were getting in?
I don't know precisely whether it's the number of units that have come on and whether there's a variance. I haven't seen the forecast numbers. I've looked through the budget looking for them. I didn't see that kind of precision in the numbers. So it may have been that there was an estimate of a certain number of units coming on, but it could also be on the commercial side as well.
Okay, so we can get another update when we get there.
Yeah.
With that. And the second question, for the personnel numbers being a little under, is that due to a shortage of personnel? Do we still need additional personnel to get the wage numbers up? Is that what you're talking about there?
I think we've had a few vacancies along the way, but I think we now actually just filled a position, or we were just filling a position recently, so I think we're pretty much fully staffed. I'm going to keep monitoring this number because we have some cost allocation or some allocation between different funds, and we're trying to make sure that that's precise. We had to make some corrections midstream here because we had a few positions that need to actually be billed both to wastewater and to public works, on a percentage basis. And so I think we've made all those corrections. If not, we'll still be tweaking those, but I think they're pretty much made now. So I think as far as where they are on their staffing, where they need to be, I don't know. That's, again, probably a Christine question.
Okay, very well. Thank you.
Anybody else? Bill? Good? Okay. We need to receive and file these, or is that it? Receive and file. We don't need a
Motion?
Yes,
a motion.
So
Motion to
moved.
receive and
So
file.
moved.
Moved?
Second?
Second? All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carries.
Thank you for the presentation.
Yeah. That's good stuff.
Okay, subcommittee reports. We already made a comment that we pulled the fraud thing.
Right,
Okay.
we'll
We'll-
correct it for the next month.
For next month, we'll have that on.
And the next month, we'll have the one that gets completed this month as well.
Okay. Future agenda items.
Well, I would like there to be a future agenda item where we request a review and discussion and question and answers on the wastewater treatment fund, how it's been allocated, budgeted, any contingency fees that have been spent and which area they're in, and give us an opportunity to fully engage. So if you'll pass that word along to the city manager, I'd appreciate that.
Any other future items?
Mr. Chair, we have developed a policy in the finance department with regard to electronic funds transfers, ACH transactions. As you may recall, we had some challenges several months back with those types of transactions, and in response to that, we've developed some policies that we'd like to bring before this body before that goes to the city council, so.
Got that? Anybody else?
I think I have one that when the survey comes in from the community survey, I would like maybe for the committee to look at, especially the ones pertaining to finances or anything like that, for just a little discussion before it goes to the council.
When do we expect that?
I'm not
Do we
sure,
know
because
yet?
I know it's pretty.
Okay, future, so.
Yeah, so it's future,
Nicole, when you
future.
see that, put it on for us. I have a question of a potential future. Jeff and I had talked about, he had mentioned about reorganizing or presenting this report that he just gave you tonight. Is there any need to have a discussion on this information in a better format for you, or are you satisfied with it? Meaning, we can have a future agenda to discuss that?
This format?
Well, yeah. Jeff, explain. You were saying you had some ideas on maybe.
Yeah, I think one of my takeaways is that I think what I'm hearing is committee members would like to see some level of an accrual-type presentation of what the numbers, to show essentially those things that are not linear, smoothed out as best we can. And so I'll take a stab at one of those models and see if that's helpful.
Okay, so we can discuss that at the next meeting, see if that.
Frank had a good idea. I think anything that anytime you can kind of explain the ups and downs, it makes it a lot easier, because people always look at the ups or they look at the downs. Obviously, that's human nature. You say, well, why is this down, or why is this up? But if you can explain that, on an accrual basis, these dollars come in like this, or whatever, it makes it a little more tangible to accept.
Any other items? Okay. Treasurer's meeting review? Well, I think
You're up. No.
What?
No, go ahead.
Well, you want to help me with that?
Yeah, I got my notes. No, go ahead.
Well, you can do it, because I've been up here juggling all this.
No, you.
What's your takeaway?
You do a great job. Go ahead.
Well, we, for presenting, and I won't be at the next council meeting.
Okay.
I'll be in LA, seeing Hamilton.
Some things have priority.
Some things have priorities.
That's one.
I just had to put that one out,
I
yeah.
haven't seen.
I am wondering if I should go and put myself exposed at that position
Oh, I know.
in LA.
Yeah,
And
that
stay,
is
and we're
another
staying
thing.
overnight too. Okay, so, the budgets, we had a good comprehensive budget report by our, Director of Finance, and I think he's answered as many questions as he could regarding our interest here, and we will make an attempt to get some of that further information that we had. The fraud and training audit report is really done. We just need to get it on record, but we were missing part of the information that we submitted the other day. So we'll have that for next month. And that's all I have right now, except we did have an ad hoc committee RFP meeting the other day for new auditors for us. And I'm going to let Jeff discuss that because it's time for the finance director's comments.
Yeah, thank you. I think, as I understand, the committee has been interested in going out for an RFP to see, exactly what kind of responses we would get. And so we did. We met with two of the finance committee members, and Lisa and I are the four people on the committee. And we did issue the RFP on Friday. It goes out for a period of 2 weeks. I've reached out to about 7 or 8 different firms to invite them to participate. And I also reached out to our existing firm to invite them to participate as well. And I think that, I'm hopeful that we'll get at least a few responses. If nothing else, I'm hopeful that even if we stay with the same firm, that we get them to sharpen their pencil and to meet our needs better. So I'm optimistic that I did get a positive response that at least Poon Group, it does intend to submit, and at least one other group. So I think at least a couple of respondents I know we'll get.
That's one of our council tasks that were there, was to look and review the RFP process.
It's a pretty aggressive timeline. We're hoping to actually have the full process done in early May. So it's really aggressive. But we need to do that in order to get the audit rolling because we want field work to occur in July. And so.
Barry, were you on
moving
that,
fast.
were you on that?
Yes.
Did you, did you review the current RFP that went out a year or two ago, or how did you make?
Well, I don't think we can discuss that at this meeting.
Probably not.
We're just giving you a report on it. We could give
Okay.
you a fuller one on the agenda the next
I
time.
thought that was
Richard-
gonna come back to this committee. It looks like you're moving forward anyway, after your subcommittee met.
Well, there's an urgency to get it out
Yeah,
and
yeah.
go through the process so we can get somebody on board to deliver. I think the council's going to expect a delivery like they did this year. We were really on target. And
That's
if we
fine.
wait too
I
long,
just wondered if there were any major changes or.
we can bring that at the next meeting.
I would be happy if there's a desire to go over it in any detail. I'd be happy to do that.
I think we should, because it's part of the council task that we have that process, and let everybody know where we came from on the process.
Sure.
What we had in the past and where we are now.
And by next meeting, we'll know who the respondents are, and we'll be able to report, where we are, if we've narrowed it down and things like that. I have to, while we're in the process, there's some level of confidentiality until we get to certain stages in the process. So I may only be able to speak in some vague areas. I may have to be a little bit more careful with my words.
Who's on the committee with you?
It's myself, Lisa Leach, who's a senior accountant, and then the chair, and then Mr. Cooley.
Okay.
Okay? What else, Jeff?
No, just we're in budget building. That's the biggest push right now. The audit's behind us. At least you always think it's behind you, and it's never really quite behind you. It's always still there. But we are moving forward now with the 2021 budget, and it's the big push. And obviously we're starting to monitor a lot more carefully what's going on in the overall economic environment. I think that where last week, if you'd have caught me this time last week, I wouldn't have been as aware of it. I've spent probably half my day reading things today about where the economy's going and things like that. So it's becoming a little bit more front of mind, and actually at this point starting to shape some of the budget preparation we're doing. So.
Thank you. Well, with that, I don't need a motion for adjournment, do we?
You can just call the time.
Pardon?
Just call the time.
I'm calling the time for adjournment at 6:45.